Welcome to the Sober Nation FM podcast, where we're putting recovery on the map. I'm your host, Jonathan Sylvester. This show is brought to you by Sobriety Engine. Do you want to take your recovery to the next level? Do you want more support, community, and fellowship? Sobriety Engine is an incredible community of men and women supporting each other in their recovery. You can get a ton of great tips, resources, and guidance to help you succeed in recovery and in life. Visit sobrietyengine.com to join today. Sober Nation FM is also brought to you by Recover Health. If you're ready to get fit and start living a healthier lifestyle, all while supporting your sobriety, then you can learn more about having me as your own personal fitness and nutrition coach at rcvrhealth.com. And whether you're listening to the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or watching on YouTube, please share this with your friends. Follow, subscribe, and leave a review. Nation, let's hop right into today's episode. Today, I'll be speaking with the host of the Dopey Podcast, Dopey Dave. Thanks for coming on the show, Dave.
Dopey Dave. Can't you say Dave from Dopey? This Dopey Dave thing is haunting me. Dopey Dave.
I like it, man. It's got a good ring to it. I think we should stick with it. All right.
It's fucked up when we started the show, because it was Dave and Chris from Dopey. It didn't occur to us that I could ever become Dopey Dave. Like that was not in the realm of it would only take Chris dying for me to become Dopey Dave, and it happened. So
man, well, I appreciate you coming on the show, man. I love your show, and I want to talk more about that. You've had a ton of really great guests on, like we were just discussing, and I'm sure you've got some good stories to tell. But I really want to hear your story first, man. So, like, what was going on before you got sober? Like, what did life look like, and how did you actually find recovery?
Well, I mean, you and I were just talking about relapse and stuff, and I actually met with my sponsor this morning, and I was talking about relapse. You know what I mean? And it occurred to me that I've never really relapsed because I never really had any recovery. So like I started using hard. I started like smoking weed when I was 20. And as soon as I started smoking weed, I smoked every day from 20 to basically 41. Yeah. And then along the way, I picked up a bunch of other habits. I got addicted to heroin and methadone and pills and and weed. Okay. Yeah, that was basically it. And I did a bunch of acid and mushrooms and ecstasy and a little bit of coke and a little bit of crack and a little bit of meth, but those weren't my things. In the end, right before I got sober, I had kicked heroin years ago. Mm-hmm. I had kicked heroin after my first daughter was born, and I wanted to have custody. So that was actually when I met Chris. Was when I kicked heroin finally, and that was in 2011. And I did heroin one more time, but between 2011 and 2015, I did a bit of Percocets, a bit of Klonopin, a bit of Xanax, and a lot of weed. And basically, I was trying to get my family back together, and my partner was just like, "You're on drugs, and I don't want to be with you if you're on drugs." And then she found out that I was taking all these pills, and she's like, "You're going to lose custody again." Wow. You know, I had lost custody. I had gotten 18 months of clean time, definitely not sobriety, but clean time. And then I got my custody back, and then I slowly integrated like smoking weed again. And once I was smoking weed, I would take a few pills here and there. So like when I got sober, I was in that kind of mode of like, no heroin, but a lot of pot, and a little bit of benzos, and I had lost custody, and I was so upset that I lost custody after years of kind of fucking it up and trying to fix it. And I remember it very well. It was like my closest thing to a spiritual awakening, where I was sitting in my apartment on the Lower East Side, and I was writing my partner a letter. And it was probably 90 degrees. It was August. And I was trying to write a letter saying, I'll be good, but please let me smoke pot. Please let me smoke pot. Everything else will be fine. I never missed a visitation. I never missed child support. Just let me smoke pot. And I had this moment where I looked at myself at the computer. I probably had a bong on the side of the computer. I was definitely chain smoking Marlboros. And I was just like, what am I doing? Wow. Why I'm begging to smoke pot, my whole life, I was 41 years old. My whole life was basically destroyed because I was a heroin addict. And here I am at 41 years old, begging to be able to see she was 5 at the time, my 5-year-old daughter, and saying, just let me get high so I can see her. And something clicked in that moment. And I was like, you know what, this is crazy. And the next day I went to a meeting, and it was a kid. He was probably 28, and he was celebrating 10 years. And I was like, what the fuck is this?
That's crazy.
And I went up to him, and he goes, oh, is today your first day? And I hadn't planned on it being my first day. But when he said that, I was like, and I was so annoyed that he was young and like good looking and in shape and all this stuff. And I was like this mess of a 41-year-old. And I was like, yeah, I think it will be. And I went home and I called my best friend and I gave him jars and jars of bud. Like I had the stoner's dream of like 10 jars with different strains. And I was like, take it. And I called another friend and I gave him all the edibles. And like, I had already gotten rid of the pills and I was done. And the next morning I went to a 7:30 a.m. 12-step meeting, and I told my story. My story was, forget the addiction. My story at that point was I was separated from my partner and my daughter, and I couldn't stop thinking about wanting to be with them, and I was just obsessed with it. And I really went to 12-step to get rid of that obsession. Like I had always heard that in 12-step philosophy, the obsession to blank will be lifted. And by the time I went, I just needed the obsession to get my family back to be lifted. Wow. So I went back and I told my story, and a dude told me he would like to see me there again. And no one had ever said that to me. So I went there. It was a 7-day-a-week, 7:30 in the morning meeting. And I started.
Wow, that's awesome. How did you know, like, had you been introduced to 12-step before, or how did you know to go to a 12-step meeting?
Well, I had been on heroin for so long, and I had been on methadone for so long. I had been to more free detoxes than I could count, on both sides of the country. And they always would have meetings. People would always bring in meetings. I went to a couple of rehabs, and every rehab I ever went to, I would go to meetings, and you would hear the talk, and you would see people with time. I just didn't want to get clean. I never wanted to get clean until I got clean, really. Every other time I knew I should, but I didn't want to be done. I wasn't done. That's the hardest thing with this whole thing. Like you can't tell someone to be done. They can only be done.
Yeah, man, that's so tough too. Like, because you see people coming in, and this was me too. Like, I didn't want to be in pain, but like, yeah, I wasn't done yet. The first few like rough patches I hit, like there was pain there. I was broke. Life sucked to some degree, but I guess it didn't suck enough at the time. Apparently, it just wasn't bad enough.
Totally. And the power of the drugs and the power of not wanting to face myself was way stronger than any desire to be done. I didn't want to be done until I got sober. Like that's very clear to me.
Wow. Yeah. So you start going to meetings, and you said you spoke with your sponsor this morning. So I'm assuming you grabbed a sponsor at some point, started working the steps, and so where do you start working the steps? Like, where do things go from there?
Well, it was like I had started going to that meeting at 7:30 in the morning, and I was like, and I'm an early riser, so like I get up early, and I was like, this is great. Every morning I'm going to get up, and I would walk across town to this meeting in this old church. And people who go to early morning meetings, they're my favorite kinds of people around recovery, because number one, they're early risers. Number two, if they go to an early meeting, chances are they want to be there. You know what I mean? It's not like, oh, I guess it's 3 p.m, so I'm just going to go, or it's
Right.
7:00 at night. In the morning, those people are like, they're making it their business to be at a fucking 12-step group at 7:30 in the morning.
That makes
so
sense.
I really love that.
Yeah.
Some guy approached me in the meeting, and he said, do you need a sponsor? And I was like, yes. And he said, I'll get you through the 12 steps fast. And I said, great. So I was like, you could be my sponsor. And like the guy was kind of weird. You know, he was a weird guy. And in the back of my head, I was like, this guy is not, I would not have asked this guy to be my sponsor, but I do want to get through the 12 steps fast.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we started working the steps, and like maybe 3 months in, he relapses. And I always would tell the story that I thank God that God had him relapse so I could get another sponsor. And the guy is doing well. He's a really sweet guy. That was just my joke about it.
Yeah.
He didn't die. He was all right, you know. And he had a ton of time. It was like God was doing for me what I couldn't do for myself, which was get rid of my sponsor. And then there was another guy in the meeting who had like 30 years, this old Jewish guy. And I asked him, and he said he would do it. And I worked the steps with him pretty quickly also. I was like, it was great. It was the first time I had ever done actual 12-step work.
Okay.
And it changed my life. And it was it was awesome. And I worked with him for probably 2.5 years, and then he moved to California, and I was pretty much sponsorless for a year or so, and that's when Chris had died. So it was really bad. You know, I didn't have a sponsor. I was barely going to meetings when Chris had died.
Wow.
And I had moved from Manhattan to Long Island, and I would go to this noon meeting, like high noon meeting, and it was a mess. It's like, you know, some meetings are just fucking messes. And I was like, I can't go here. I mean, I forced myself to go, and I didn't want to be there. And then I found a morning meeting there, an 8 a.m. meeting that met on the beach.
Wow.
On the Great South Bay.
That's awesome.
And I was like, this is the meeting. You know, it's a 7-day-a-week, 8 a.m. on the beach. And I found some dude, and the dude couldn't be any more different than me ever. He has neck tattoos. He's a contractor. He has tattoos across his knuckles that say "real deal," only he spells real, REEL, because he's like a fisherman. And but he's fucking awesome. And like, you know, he believes that his God is love, and the more things he can run through his higher power, which is love, the better his life becomes. And I was like, that's great. I was like, I like that. I want to be more like that. And I asked him to sponsor me, and he did. And I talk to him every week a little bit, and I see him, you know, a couple times a month. And I'm going to do the steps again with him. And I actually I started laying out my plan to do it this morning. So I'm about to do it.
That's cool. That's awesome, man. So what would you say is the biggest thing that you struggled with early on in your sobriety?
In very early sobriety, the biggest thing I struggled with was the continued upset of wanting stuff that I didn't have, of wanting things to happen faster than they were going to happen. And that's still my I think that would be my number one problem with all of it. Is want my will, you know what I mean? Wanting shit on my schedule as opposed to the bigger schedule, you know? And that's you know, I think that's my addiction, that's my addict, and that's my sober defect. That's my biggest problem.
Yeah, I get that, man. I mean, I remember coming out of rehab, you know, thankfully I only went to treatment one time, inpatient treatment, because I definitely did a lot of like Suboxone, you know, detoxes and stuff like that. And I got out, hadn't had my cell phone for a while, hadn't been on social media for a while, you know, get on Facebook, start scrolling through. And, you know, I mean, I was in my late 20s at the time. I'm in my early 30s now, or mid 30s now. And I start scrolling through, and like, you know, here I am getting out of rehab. Like, I'm broke as shit, have literally nothing going for me. And I see all these people like great jobs, getting married, having kids. And man, just like the guilt, the shame, but mainly like, yeah, like I deserve to be up here, and I'm like down here, and the whole comparing and all that stuff. So I get that for sure. Now you've mentioned, we mentioned the show obviously, and you've mentioned Chris a few times, who was your co-host, and this is who you started the Dopey Podcast with. And for those who aren't familiar, it's the show about drugs, addiction, and dumb shit. And you started this with your buddy Chris. So how did you guys decide to start a podcast? Like, where did all this even come from initially?
Well, it's funny. Basically, I had because I had my drug career was like I didn't have another career. Like when I got out of college, I started working in TV, and I became a producer in TV, and I became a heroin addict like immediately.
Oh, wow.
And within a year, I had gotten a big contract, and within a year, I lost the contract, lost my job, went to rehab, lost my apartment, and like I didn't work again for like 10 years or something. Like my life just like became like me living at a girl's house, and she paid for everything, and I did drugs, and that was it. For like 10 years. Like she had 2 cats, and I was like the 3rd cat lying around her house, like on methadone and pills and stuff. And so by the time I met Chris, I had started working at a deli in Manhattan, and I was a waiter in the deli. Okay, and I had always wanted to have a talk show. And when I was a younger man, I had had a little music talk show, and I had always been around like weird creative schemes and stuff. So when I was working, I had the idea of making a show, a web series about a waiter who hates waiting tables, and he wants to have a talk show. So he does the talk show while he waits tables. And I made that show, and then we called it The Last Jewish Waiter. And I made 3 episodes of it, and people really liked it. And like people
cool
wrote about it, and it was cool.
Yeah.
And Chris loved it, right? Chris loved it, and he was like, Dave, I love this. He's like, if you ever come up with anything like this, I want to be in it. I want to be a part of it. And I'm like, and Chris was like, I couldn't imagine Chris doing anything creative. It just wasn't. I didn't see it. But then I remembered I had this other friend who was really into podcasts, and when I was deep in my addiction, he was like, we should do a podcast about drugs and drug stories. And he put together a reel of some celebrity drug stories, and I was like, dude, you're not a drug addict. I was like, hi, like, this isn't good, whatever. And but somewhere in the back of my mind, the idea stuck, and Chris was like, I want to do something creative. And I had just gotten clean. He had said that, like, and I was like probably 2 months clean. I was miserable. I was separated from my family, and I wound up.
Was he clean already?
Yeah, he had like 2.5 years.
Okay.
And he was such a mess when he was using that when he got 2 years and I had a few months, I was like, I'm gonna call him, and I'm gonna see how he did it, and I'm gonna take his advice. And like, he wasn't my sponsor, but he was my entire sober network. I called him every day, and I would stay on the phone with him and annoy the shit out of him. And he was like, I want to be in The Last Jewish Waiter. And I was like, fuck it. I was like, let's make a podcast about the worst things we ever did on drugs. And I was like, and nothing recovery. I was like, just the worst things we ever did on drugs, and we'll call it War Stories. And it will just be war stories. And that's it. Like nothing else. And we'll just tell our worst stories, and people will love it. And he was like, okay, what do I do? And he lived in Great Barrington, Massachusetts, in a sober house. And I was like, just come to my apartment, and we're going to do it. And he goes, well, what do I need to buy gear or anything? And I was like, no. I was like, we don't need any gear. We don't need anything. We'll talk into my computer, and that'll be fine. It'll work. Because as far as I could tell, if we bought gear, we wouldn't do the podcast. It would be a waste of money on the gear, and we'd have this gear, and we wouldn't have a podcast. If we did anything extra, it wasn't going to happen. We needed to put the horse before the cart.
I like
so
that.
He came to my apartment, and he was like, well, what are we going to do? And my vision was strictly the Howard Stern show. Like, I love the Howard Stern show, and I love how Howard did his show. And I was like, what we're going to do is I'm going to pretend it's the Howard Stern show, and I'm going to be Howard Stern, and we're going to play, and we're going to talk about what we're up to, and then you're going to tell a drug story, and I'm going to make fun of you, and that's what we're going to do. And we did that, and it was super fun, and that's how it started. And we couldn't call it War Stories because it turned out there was a podcast called War Stories that was about actual stories from war.
Real war stories.
And we sat there, and we were like, well, what are we going to call it? And I was like, I love the word dope. I think the word dope is such a good word because like I grew up, I'm 46 now. So I grew up, I was, a teenager in the 90s, and
Mm-hmm.
things that were dope was cool. And then when I became a heroin addict, it's like, yo, you got that dope, and then I would walk to my restaurant on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, and there'd be these Dominican guys on Clinton Street, and one dude had a black hat and it said dope across his black hat in gold letters, like literally letters made of gold. And I can only imagine my grandfather, like in a car, seeing this kid and being like, "Look at this fucking dope," like idiot dope.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
and I said to Chris, I was like, "It has to be something with the word dope." And he was like, "How about two dopes talking about dope?" And I was like, "No, let's just call it Dopey." And then it just like, and I mean, it's
Wow.
such a, we loved it, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
And that was it. And we just
man.
started and we never stopped.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, I love how you just like jumped right into it because I think so many people, like when they're trying to do something like this, like number one, most people don't follow through with the idea at all, number one. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I guess you had already done the show and like you had done, some production and other stuff before. So maybe you had a little more confidence than most people, but you're like, no, dude, we don't need the mic. We don't need the gear. Let's not get any of that shit. Let's just like do this thing. Let's just hop on and press record and do it. I think that's pretty awesome, man. So you start this and it's war stories at first. Like now it's changed a bit, right? And a big part of that, I would guess, is because Chris passed away, right? So what if you, I mean, can you talk about that a little bit? Like what happened with Chris and like he relapsed, right? At some point.
Yeah.
And man, I'm sorry to hear that. Like when you and I started, talking initially, I didn't know that. And I'm sure you've lost a lot of friends to this disease. And I certainly have, way too many, a lot more than I should have for sure. Did you know, like looking back, and I'm not sure this really matters, but I am kind of curious, like just out of personal experiences, did you have any idea that he was using again? Like, did you know that this was going on?
No, I didn't.
Okay.
Um, and that's very difficult for me. And I think we knew that the show had to be a recovery show, like in the first episode, because if
Okay.
it wasn't going to be a recovery show, it was going to be like a crazy glorification of drug show, and we didn't want that. We just wanted it to be funny,
Yeah. Okay.
um,
Okay.
and extreme. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
as soon as we did the first episode, we needed to say we were sober, so that
Yeah.
people knew that we were not getting high after we told these stories, basically.
Yeah.
Um, but with Chris, um, it was a horrible, horrible thing. And like when you talk about losing friends and stuff to this disease, the truth is, like, I was a drug addict for, active drug addict for 12 or 15 years or something. And I didn't lose anybody until I got sober. And I
Mm.
lost two of my best friends after I got sober.
Wow.
And it fucked me up. And
Yeah.
with Chris, I didn't know. Of course, in retrospect, it's obvious. But when we were doing it, when we were doing the show, and when he was failing, I didn't realize it was a relapse. I mean, at the time,
Mm.
my partner she was pregnant, and we were about to have our second daughter, and we were looking for a house. And my work had changed a lot, and I was incredibly distracted with these things.
Okay.
And and still, like, we had started that Dopey in 2015 in December or something, and it was 2017, and we hadn't missed an episode.
Mm.
Once we had started making the show, I talked to Chris every day, and he was incredibly busy. He managed a sober house. He worked as a sober companion. His last job was actually in Texas.
Wow.
um, he um, he was in college at a PsyD program in Massachusetts. He had a girlfriend who was a medical student at Harvard. He did Dopey. He was incredibly committed and busy. And as you know, how addicts kind of, like, when they become dicks and they become unreliable and
Mm.
they become not friendly, not around. And that's kind of what Chris was doing before he died.
Okay.
And I just assumed he was done with the show. He was also an intern at a school. He was like a social work intern or a psychology intern at a school. So he was like so busy. And I just figured he had lost interest in the show. And we were fighting so much before he died. And it was because he was using, because he wasn't himself. And the most amazing thing was that we got to have this conversation the night before he died. Like we were fighting every day at the end. And the night he died, he died in July on a Friday. Okay. And on Thursday night, I think he died on July 24th, but I get the dates confused. And on the night before, we were fighting because we hadn't done a show together in person in about a month. The last time I saw Chris alive, actually, was when we went to interview Artie Lang in Hoboken. Okay. And he wasn't himself that day. He was not. It was like, it turned out Chris and Artie were totally fucked up, and I was the only one sober at the interview.
Wow.
And I hadn't seen him, in person for like 3 weeks. And my best friend had died in June. My best friend Todd, who I used with more than anybody, had died in June. And Chris wound up dying 6 weeks later. And the night before he died, he like broke down crying to me, but he didn't say he was using. He said, "I love making Dopey. It's all I care about. I wish we could just do this professionally." He was telling me everything he knew I wanted to hear because he was a masterful manipulator. But I also think like there was just some like piece of him that maybe, I think he wanted to tell me he was using and he couldn't tell me.
Yeah.
But I'm incredibly grateful that we had this beautiful, loving conversation. And the next morning, I texted him at 6:13 in the morning. And his girlfriend said, "You better check on Chris because I think he's in trouble." So I think I texted him at 6:13 in the morning, and at 6:14, he texted me back because he always texted me right back, even if he was asleep. He would text me back, and he texted back, "I'm okay. Not really okay, but I'm alive," is what he wrote me. "I'll call you later. Everything's okay, whatever." And at 10 o'clock or something that morning, his girlfriend called me and told me she found him dead. Wow. And it was crazy. I didn't even believe it. It took me like a day, maybe even took me more than a day to really, really believe it.
Yeah, for it to click. Yeah, I get it, man. I hate hearing stories like that. But at the same time, like that's really the shit I need to hear, man.
Right.
It's a reminder, and it also brings to mind for me, Dave, like I think a couple of important lessons that I've learned in this deal, over the few years that I've been sober. And number one, it's that like, you want to give, especially your friends in this deal, you want to give them the benefit of the doubt, right? Like when things like, maybe things don't even seem off, but like they are a little distant and, maybe they are busy and it's like, you kind of want to say in your mind, like, or I've done at least like, oh, they're probably busy with family, with work. And man, like I want to give people that benefit of the doubt, but I think 9 times out of 10 with people like us, like what it feels like is going on is probably exactly what is going on.
I think for me, like I get it, and it's like that old expression, like if it walks like a duck and quacks, it's probably a fucking duck.
Yeah.
But for me, and this is just like probably my own self-centeredness, it's like when I'm clean, I assume everybody's clean.
That's the other thing, man. That's what I was going to say. Like, I don't even see this shit sometimes. Like,
I don't see it at all. I'm done.
And it's crazy. I'm like, I did this for years. Like, how did I not? Like, there have been times where, like, I've run into an old friend with my wife, and my wife will be like, "Did you notice he was, like, totally fucked up?" And I'm like, "No." I was like, "Well, what are you talking about?" And she was like, "Yeah, he was, like, out of it."
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. Like I feel so, and that's weird You know, I think that's really weird because you're an addict in recovery. I'm an addict in recovery. Like,
Mhm.
I lived so many years fucked, and when I was fucked, I assumed everybody was fucked.
Yeah,
And
right.
now that I'm sober, I assume everybody's sober.
Yeah.
And it's just like, I also think I did some serious damage to my brain, so I don't
Mhm.
think I see everything perfectly clear.
Slips by. Yeah.
Yeah. So I you always wish you knew what was happening, and you always wish that you could go back and change something, but you can't.
Mhm.
And I think when he died, right, I think I didn't have a sponsor when he died. And I knew I needed a sponsor really badly. So and my sponsor moved to California. So I sought out this guy who I thought was really bright and wise, and had a lot of sobriety,
Okay.
and he said to me that when I told him about my friends that had died, and he told me that was them carrying the message of AA, and I
Mm.
was just like devastated to hear that, but it's true,
It is.
like I think that Chris's death has as much as I hate it and as much misery that it's caused me, it's done some good for other people. It just not for me. Um, and it's like I know that there are dopey listeners who've changed their life because that happened to him.
Yeah.
It sucks. It's cold. It's fucking. But so is dying, right? It's the whole thing. It's just the worst.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I get it, man. Like, when I first got sober, I'll keep this short, but one of my best friends died. Like,
I'm sorry. That
I
sucks.
was, selling drugs before I got sober, and I brought up given him a bunch of pills basically, and he was just going crazy with them. And found out that one night he ran off the road, head on collision, and man, I blame myself for that for years. And it's so crazy because when I was in treatment, like one of my counselors, I kind of like committed to like, I'm going to give this a real shot, and I'm going to take the suggestions and do the work. And my sponsor told me when I was in rehab, some of the best advice I ever got. He was like, do your mental laundry while you're here. Like, drop as much of this bullshit as you can, and the steps will help with the rest. And but anyway, like I told my counselor about this, and we were like in this group session, and I was talking about how I had blamed myself for so long. And she basically just asked me the question, like, just said, hey, turn the tables. Like, do you think your friend, uh you know do you think that he would be blaming you? And it's like, no. And she's like, well, there you go.
It's a tough pill to swallow.
It
It
is,
really is.
man.
I'm sorry that that happened to you. And it's like, again, when I was talking to my sponsor this morning, he was telling me about a guy he knew who's got into a fight with his son. He had a teenage son, and the son fucking took the guy's gun and killed himself. And this happened this week. And
Oh
and my
yeah.
sponsor's friends with the dad,
uh,
and like the dad has to live with that, like
it's
that he
awful.
didn't just say the right thing, or like this is the stuff. Like, when I was getting high, I didn't think about dying from it. Even when I wanted to die, I
Yeah.
didn't think that I could die from it. And I don't think Chris thought he could die from it. And I don't think my friend Todd thought he could die from it. But like, I think like the difference between like oblivion and actual death, in the words, there is no difference. But
Mm.
in your action, when you're using, you're not trying to die. You're trying to get high.
Yeah.
And the fact that the outcome can be that, it's terrible. And it's very easy to blame yourself. And like, do you know how many people wrote me like, how could you not know that Chris was using? Like, if you
Really.
listen to the episodes right before he died, he sounds totally fucked up.
Wow.
And I just believed that he was busy and believed that he was exhausted, because he was exhausted. It
Mhm.
was late at night. Like, I believed it. But if you go back and you listen to it, it's clear as day. and,
Really.
and there was a time over that summer, um, where I kind of like had a conversation with him about it, where he had done some weird shit, and Todd had just died, and I was like, dude, what the fuck is going on with you?
Mhm.
And he like sat me down and he told me why it wasn't happening, and I believed him right away.
Wow.
You know, I don't blame myself
No,
for
you
any
can't.
of it, but it blows to lose your friend. You
It
know?
does. It does. Yeah. And I'm sure a lot of your listeners have dealt with the same thing. And I know a lot of ours have as well. So, man, yeah, shitty story. Let's move on to some brighter stuff here, man. It's getting,
Well, I mean, like that's the really the worst thing, right? The worst thing about it all is me and Chris
mm,
start a podcast about drugs, addiction, and dumb shit, and he relapses and dies. You
yeah.
know what I mean? Do you know how many people are like, "Well, you guys had it coming." You know what I mean? Like
Wow.
you weren't like holy enough about your recovery. You were fucking with it, and that's another thing it's real. It happened, but
Yeah.
like that's not what we wanted to happen. That
No,
wasn't the point.
no.
Um, and I think, and I just don't think consequentially. Chris was 10 years younger than me, right?
Okay.
I had by the time he died, I had 2 children.
Mm,
When we started Dopey, I had one, and I had no interest in getting high again. I just had ruined my life, and I didn't want to. The way I decided it was I had ruined the first half of my life,
mhm.
and I was never going to get higher than I had gotten. There was not like another level to the high. I had gotten as high as I could get,
Yeah.
and my life it wasn't as bad as it could be, but it was pretty pathetic. And I said to myself, if this is what my life is like in addiction, I want to see what continuous recovery can get me. I want to see what a life at 41 till however long I get to live clean yields, And so there wasn't like when we were doing Dopey and we were telling these stories and we were having fun with it, I wasn't
Yeah.
considering using. Like
Right.
it
Right.
was never part of it for me.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize that it was for him. He swore up and down that it wasn't, and that's hubris, I guess, the fact that we did it the way we did it.
Right.
Um, and that's hard for me because I did believe in what we were doing and I do believe in what I'm doing now. And I think we had a moment after Todd died where Chris was telling me some fucked up story from a listener or something. And I was like, I don't think it's funny. And he's like, what do you mean you don't think it's funny? And I was like, I think now that Todd is dead, this story isn't funny to me anymore.
Oh,
Like
wow.
I think it requires clean time for it to be funny. It requires some distance from the last terrible act for it to be funny.
That
And
makes
and
sense.
and you can say I was so fucked up and now I'm much better off and I was
Yeah.
an idiot and I was not living the right way then and now I am kind of thing.
Well, yeah,
You
that
know?
makes perfect sense. It's kind of like, when you're day one, maybe you had this experience. I walked in the room and people were laughing about the most fucked up things in these
Yeah.
meetings. Like everyone that thought it was hilarious. So like this guy had like wrecked his car and destroyed his life. And I'm just like, what am I missing here? And
Right.
now I can look at all the stuff I did and it's funny, but yeah, to the new person or the person still struggling, yeah, it's tough. So that had to have, it sounds like that changed the approach to the show a little bit. And definitely after Chris died, it sounds like things kind of took a little turn or different direction, right?
It had to, because we had an audience and the audience loved Chris
Yeah.
and the audience was using, a
Mm.
big portion of the audience was using and I didn't, and we had lost some of the audience, 2 huge Dopey fans had died before Todd,
Wow.
and both of them were actually working for the show and they died. So
Wow.
like within 5 months, 4 people integral to the show died. And, so I needed to change a little bit about the show, but I didn't want to change the spirit of the show. Like the show wasn't a gimmick. The show was exactly how I felt about recovery, which is like, you should have laughs. I love war stories. I love hearing about the dumbest shit that you've done. And I love integrating that into recovery because otherwise I don't think I can do it. I don't think I can do the Pollyanna-ish bullshit. Like I think it's like the hardest thing is you take somebody who's destroyed their life and used every day and done whatever they could to get drugs and and stayed high, and then all of a sudden you're saying now you have to do the next right thing. Now you need to turn your will over to a higher power. And all of a sudden it's saying this crazy degenerate has to be this pseudo-religious spiritual person. And I think that in itself is so absurd. That was the point of Dopey. So I needed that piece to stay alive while dealing with the fact that some sort of spiritual life is probably beneficial to drug addicts. I think it's both,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
that changed. Yeah, it changed.
I mean, and I get, like, I think the humor side for me, and I would say for most people, like, it just has to be in our lives. I was interviewing a guy the other day, and he was just talking about, he sees the importance in needing to, he described it as like not completely grow up almost.
Right.
But what he was really saying is like still allowing space for like really like fun in your life, like that you can do both. Like you can do the recovery deal and be serious about it. And, if you're a 12-step person, practice these principles in all your affairs, so to speak, but still like have fun and be able to joke about like some sick shit occasionally, and I think that's just like part of this.
Totally. I mean, for me, if there was no fun in recovery, I wouldn't do it. You know what I mean? Like if I have to, if I would trade no fun in recovery, like a miserable sober life, for a life using, even if I was miserable using. But I have so much fun in recovery, and I have so much fun laughing at. I wanted Dopey to be like laughing at going to meetings. I wanted Dopey to be laughing about people at meetings. I wanted Dopey to be like laughing at all this stuff because it's funny. Like also like, some of the things that we had done were so ridiculous, when we were using, that maybe, lots of people don't think the stories are funny, but I do, and I just think it's like next level fucking shit, basically. And I also think it's funny when I think something that's so bad is so funny and somebody doesn't think that's funny. Like for me, that's comedy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I feel like and when he died, like a lot of people were like, "Are you going to still make the show? Are you going to still make the show?"
Yeah.
And my whole life I wanted to have a talk show. So I was not going to stop making the show. Like I had an audience and I didn't want to stop making the show. I did say, if the show sucks, I'm going to stop making it. And if the show stops being fun, I'm going to stop making it.
Okay.
And the show wasn't fun for a while after he died.
Yeah, I can see that.
It was a lot of work, and it was painful, and it was weird, but eventually it got to be fun again. And I always wanted to do something like this. So like I love the puzzle that is making the show. Like, how is it going to work? Who am I going to get on it? Like, what am I going to do? Like, I love that stuff. I love the problem solving. I love the audience. I love making a show and interacting with the audience. So like, I did it because I did it at first because I knew the audience like counted on it. Like there were so many people that were like, we listen to Dopey every Friday night, every Saturday night, whatever. And then Chris dies. What am I going to do? Not make the show? I had to try and deliver it. Sure. And then, it was rocky at first, but eventually it never will be the show it was. But, like there are some good aspects to it. It's just not because Chris isn't there. It's, that sucks.
Well, and I don't know Chris, man, but my guess is that he probably would have wanted you to keep going.
Definitely. He definitely would have, he knew how much I loved doing this, and he knew how driven I was to do it. And, I think if I had died, I don't think he would have kept making the show, but he didn't have that same, like, he didn't want to be a talk show host when he was a kid.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I did.
Yeah. Yeah. You had that drive.
I just always wanted to do it. It was like what I wanted to do. I mean, as weird as that is, it's like my mother would listen to like AM radio in the morning, and I was like, I want to do that. And then I became a heroin addict and wound up making a podcast about heroin addiction. It's weird,
man. It's crazy how things work. And you guys have had some really awesome guests on the show. I mean, Andrew Zimmern, the chef. I'm not even going to name probably some of the, the biggest people in your mind, but like Andrew Zimmern, Dr. Drew, Steve Adler from Guns N' Roses. You mentioned Artie Lang. There's got to be a guest or a story that like sticks out to you. Like as soon as I start rattling people off right here, do you have a story or maybe like a guest interaction or interview that maybe you could share that kind of sticks out in your mind?
My favorite is Artie, because I was so fucking crazy with Artie. But the most like Jamie Lee Curtis was like a crazy sort of God weird moment where and Mark Maron was the biggest example I have of a quote unquote God shot I've ever had in my life. He's like he's the closest evidence I have to some like higher power at work orchestrating the universe. And I mean that like basically Chris had died and it was like, I don't know, I think he had died in the summer and it was in the late fall.
Okay.
And we had Steven Adler on. We had a few people on, but Steven Adler was not good on Dopey. It was a fucking train wreck. We had a bunch of guests and it just wasn't good.
Yeah. Okay.
And then I had booked this guy called David Sheff. And David Sheff is a writer. He wrote the book Beautiful Boy, which was a movie about his son, Nick Sheff. And Nick Sheff wrote Tweak, and Nick Sheff wrote We All Fall Down. He was a big addiction writer. Yeah. And David Sheff was a journalist for Rolling Stone and Playboy. He had interviewed John Lennon. And Beautiful Boy, the movie, had just come out. Okay. And he had agreed to come on Dopey. And I was waiting tables at Katz's, and I'm about to pick up some matzo ball soups and bring them to the table. And I'm looking at my phone obsessively, which I do, and I see that David Sheff has canceled the appearance. He said in 6 months he can do it. Meanwhile, his movie's out now, and I was like, dude, I want it now. I don't want it in 6 months. Who cares? Right. Come on in 6 months. Yeah, you're important now. And I was like, the show's fucking done. I was like, I was so frustrated. I was like, I don't know what I'm gonna do. And I go up to the maitre d', and the maitre d' was like vaping nicotine. So I take his nicotine vape, and I go out on the corner of Houston and Ludlow, and I'm vaping, and I'm thinking, I don't know what I'm gonna do, like with the show. And Mark Maron comes walking down the street, like literally, like in that moment. I walked up to him, and I was like, "Are you Mark Maron?" And he was like, "Yeah." And I was like, "Oh, my name's Dave. I do this show Dopey." And he had heard of Dopey because I tweeted at him like 100 times about coming on. And he's like, "Oh, you're the annoying guy that always tweets at me."
That's funny.
And I invited him to come and have breakfast the next morning at Katz's, and he came, and I told him the story, and he was like, maybe I'll do it, maybe I won't do it. And then he wound up inviting me to his hotel room, and we recorded it on his gear, and he recorded the whole thing, and it was fucking amazing. And then a year later, we were coming up on our 200th episode, and I was in this terrible mood, and I had actually just celebrated 4 years, and there he was again, sitting across the street. Wow. And I recorded, and he recorded something for the 200th episode. So like, Maron is like, he is like my little celebrity higher power story. And also like the interview with him was really good. He was amazing. So that was my favorite. Jamie Lee Curtis I met at that restaurant too. I mean, I work at the most famous deli in the world. It's called Katz's Deli.
Yeah, Katz's. Yeah.
I met her there. She was like buying a bagel for Christopher Guest, her husband. And she's walking out of the store, and I run out the back door, and I like go to the front door like Bugs Bunny, and I like light up a cigarette, and I'm standing there hanging out, and I'm like, "Oh, Jamie Lee Curtis," like acting like I didn't realize.
Yeah, like, "Oh, wow, that's weird. Fancy, exactly. Fancy to run into you here."
Exactly. And she was like, "Oh, hi," and I was like, "Listen, I'm a drug addict in recovery," and she's like, "I'm a drug addict in recovery," and I was like, "I do this podcast called Dopey," and she goes, "I'll do it." And I was like, "Great." And I like take out my waiter pad and I write down like Dopey Podcast at gmail.com, and I give it to her. And Chris was still alive then. And I told Chris, and Chris like never got excited about anything, and he was like, "Holy shit, Jamie Lee Curtis!" And he told his mom and whatever. And then over the weekend, I'm taking my daughter shopping, and we get this email, and it doesn't say Jamie Lee Curtis; it says some other name.
Okay.
And she's like, "So what are we doing?" And I just figured it was some wacko, and I was like, "What do you mean?" And she writes back, "Podcast," and I wrote back, "You mean like do it?" And she wrote, "Yeah." And then Chris calls me and he's like, "I think that's Jamie Lee Curtis." And I was like, "Fuck." And I figured out it was her, like deciphering her email, which is her name. I just didn't realize her actual name. And fucking then I sent her a link to the email or to the show, and she's like, "I'm not doing your show." And I was like, "Why not?" And she goes, "You guys don't take your recovery seriously enough." And she bailed, and she didn't come on the show until after Chris died. Because it was that was like how it would be serious for her.
Wow. Yeah, I was gonna say she is like dead serious about her recovery. Like
very serious lady. Very
super. Yeah. Wow. Man, that's crazy that she came on though.
Oh yeah, it was fucking cool. And she we just did this thing in honor of Chris's death called Dopey Day, where everyone in the audience put the Dopey logo over their eyes on the day he died, and she did it. She posted herself with the Dopey logo for Instagram, which was very generous of her. Maron wouldn't do it. Mark Maron said no.
Well, he shows up when you need him, though, right?
Yeah, he does. He does.
Well, that's awesome, man. So, what's next for you guys? Like, what's next for the Dopey show?
Fucking Dopey show. I want it to be like the biggest thing in the world. You know what I mean? Like, I want it to be like I want it to be like a TV show, and I can stop wearing the stupid sunglasses. I want it to be like Live with Regis and Kathy Lee. Like, I want it to be like a sunny morning show where we talk about the worst things we ever did while we drink coffee and like make scones and shit. And like Neil Young comes on and plays.
That would
Needle
be awesome.
That
would be awesome.
I would like to like go to like Detox and have the guys in Detox sing karaoke, or go to rehab and like take them out begging in the streets, like do weird, just like I want it to be a way for addicts to have fun and feel like they're part of something that's positive and fun, and they're not losers. It's like all we wanted to do was have fun. We wanted to feel better. We didn't want to like destroy anybody's life. You know what I mean? Like worst case scenario is we wanted to avoid pain. Best case scenario is we wanted to have a good time. But either way, like in sobriety, shouldn't we be having a good time and like looking after each other in a positive way? And that's what I want Dopey to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Man, I love that. So, you talked a little bit about like, having talking to your sponsor this morning, getting ready to go through the steps again. Can you tell us a little bit more about just what your recovery looks like today?
Well, on a good day, I get up in the morning and I pray, and then I do push-ups, and then I do sit-ups, and then I meditate, and then I put on like Howard Stern or Mark Maron, and I do more push-ups and sit-ups, and then I get my baby and I give her a bottle, and then I like take her to Starbucks and buy coffee, and then I start working from home. That's a good day. And a bad day, I wake up and I get the baby. My life is just like work. I've been working from home for Katz's, setting up catering stuff, and my life is Dopey. It's those two things, and my life is my family. And my recovery is, when I struggle, you know what I mean? And I don't struggle in terms of wanting to use, but I struggle in terms of getting angry, or getting resentment, or feeling a certain way about something, or being fearful. I mean, my sponsor's like, that's when you need to turn to your higher power. You need to recognize in those moments that you can get out of it. And then once you can do that, he says, and when you're feeling good, you need to turn to your higher power so that it becomes part of your, every kind of action. And when your higher power is in all of your actions and in all of your affairs, you're going to be much better off. And like, I am not like at that level at all. But I get it now. You know what I mean? Like, I get it. Like, I see it like my character defects come calling like constantly. And some of them are so familiar that I'm happy to see them. They're like old friends and I don't want to give them up. But like when I hear about, like, I have a very close friend who struggles with, like feeling that she's not good at stuff.
Okay.
And it's like, and I'm tired of hearing about it. I'm like, come on. I was like, how many times are you going to tell me this story? Like, why don't you use your higher, because she's in recovery. I was like, why don't you use your higher power and overcome this character defect? You know what I mean? Do a little step 7, like give it up, find a way to do it. And I think, that's the next level of my recovery, is trying to actually use my higher power in a way to improve my life. You know what I mean? Like, and it's just, I don't do well with the bigger spiritual picture. I feel uncomfortable being a quote unquote child of God and speaking that way.
Mm-hmm.
And I know deep in my heart I actually feel that way. I just haven't crossed the bridge to being able to really effectively speak that way. And I'm afraid of talking more like that. And my sponsor's always like, you should talk more about God on Dopey. He's like, the show will blow up if you talk more about God on Dopey. And I'm like, I don't really want to. But I do. You know what I mean? I'm trying to find a way to bring it in a way that it kind of shows how easy it is to be scared of being spiritual.
Mm-hmm.
And that spirituality isn't necessarily religious fanaticism. Like my father hates religion, and he doesn't understand the difference between spirituality and religion. And he doesn't, and for some reason, like, he wanted me to be well for so long, and the only way I got well was through spirituality, and he like puts it down without understanding what it is, and it's very complicated, don't you think?
Yeah, no, it's really complicated. And man, I hear you 100%. I never thought that I kind of talk about my spirituality on the show, I guess, like when other guests are, but I get what you're saying 100%. It's still like almost an out of, I'm 7 years sober, and it's still almost an out of body experience sometimes for me to even be thinking that I would ever be talking about spirituality, much less on a show that a shitload of people are going to see, and really, like, when I first started sponsoring guys, for instance, I was scared to mention the spirituality thing. But like, here's the deal, man, is that that's not true to my story. I was super anti spirituality, religion, like, the religion thing. I don't want to say it was beaten into me, but like to some degree, like the experience that a lot of us have, it's like our parents' higher power or whatever. And that wasn't working for me. And, man, what changed my life was really giving prayer to like something that I didn't even know what the hell it was, like an honest shot. And that, along with like, the 12-step stuff and other things too, like the spiritual side was really what changed my life in such a large part. And I was scared to mention it to these guys because I didn't want to scare them off. And then it got to the point where it's like, that's not being like honest or true to what my experience has been. And I finally just got to the point I was like, look, if the spiritual side of this is going to be what scares these guys off, then so be it, and but
Or they're
yeah.
not ready for it at that point. You know what I mean? They're not ready
Yeah.
for the actual solution.
Yeah.
And it's like, but it's like, this is the my favorite thing about it. It's like when they talk about honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness. I was always honest,
Mm-hmm.
and I was honest to a fault, and I was always open-minded.
Right.
But I wasn't necessarily willing.
Yeah.
And when I went to 12-step, I didn't really have a relationship with a higher power whatsoever.
No.
But it occurred to me that if I was willing to have one, that was the only way that this could work.
Yeah. Yeah.
Otherwise, it couldn't work. And somebody who's like, I want to get clean. I want to stop doing this. I want to stop drinking. I want to stop using heroin. I want to stop doing this. But I hate 12-step and I don't want to deal with God. Well, that means you're not willing to do it. Do you know what I mean? And like, you need to like decide you're willing to do anything. So if you decide, like, the idea that you're not that you're the biggest thing in the universe is like, it's like, that's not true. The ocean is bigger than you. The sky is bigger than you. The earth is bigger than you. Just realize that you're not the biggest thing and ask somebody for help. Ask the universe for help. It will work. It's like,
Yeah.
I don't have an explanation for how it works. And my spirituality like is a little bit deformed and retarded and like not really functioning in the highest way because I'm a little bit scared of it. I just know that I do it and it works,
Yeah. Yeah. No, I get it, man. And look, I'm someone that can see, like, without judgment, all the different sides going on. And I've said in almost every episode recently, like, one of the reasons that I was excited to do this show and like I like doing this show more and more is because I learn more about different people's recovery and like what they're doing. And some people aren't doing 12-step stuff. And I learned things about that. And I've become a lot less judgmental about that. Cause when I first got sober, I was like, it's 12 steps or you're not. And, but I get what you're saying. I think with me, man, the spiritual side of it, it was for me, either I am going to be honest, open-minded, and willing to just like give these suggestions a shot, or I'm going to die. Like that was it. It was black and white. It was one or the other. And I was just like, man, I'm like, I don't want to say I didn't have a choice because I did or whatever, but I had to give it a shot. Like that was it. That was it. And it's a cool thing because I think, what I hear you saying is that it's not just about staying sober anymore. It's like you're seeing that the spiritual side of things can like open up more doors for you in life. And I think that's pretty awesome.
I cannot believe how good my life is. Like,
Mm-hmm.
like in my worst moment, I wish Dopey was, Dak Shepard or Joe Rogan or something. And in my worst moments, I wish that Dopey was bigger. I wish that I didn't have to rely on a real job. I wish that that everything, that our 2-year-old was easier, that our house was cleaner. I wish those things. But like in every other moment, like last night I took my daughter to the drugstore like to pick up a prescription for my wife and to pick out some ice cream, and me and my 10-year-old are standing looking at the ice cream, talking about the flavors, and I was just thinking like, this is the greatest moment I've ever had in my life. Just discussing ice cream flavors with my daughter and going home and eating ice cream and watching Naked and Afraid XL. Like I couldn't ask for more than that. And it's only because I got sober. Like I would not have, and my life is so good, and it's all because of that, like, and what you just said, I had the exact same experience. Like when Chris was alive, like people would be on Suboxone or on methadone or smoke weed or drink casually, and I'd be like, they're full of shit. Like that's not real recovery. That's not this. That's not that. And that's because it wasn't that for me. When I was on methadone, I smoked weed and I took pills and I did coke and I shot dope and I did everything, and I didn't really participate in the actual program ever. I always did what I wanted. And it occurred to me, like, just because they can't do 12-step or have an aversion to 12-step, like, why would I bash them? And I think I just liked being controversial when Chris was alive. Like, it was fun.
Yeah.
Like, I could be a big mouth and he could be like, defend everybody's choice. And then after he died, it became obvious to me that all I could do was advocate for addicts, on a very basic level, for their quality of life and for their happiness. And I couldn't give a fuck if somebody does 12-step or takes methadone. If their life is better and they have that burden off of them, I support them, it's like, I'm so happy that I can be in a situation that offers some comfort to these people because I'm one of them,
Yeah,
Like,
man.
it's
Well
great.
said. Very well said. Before we wrap up, I want to ask you if there's maybe one piece of advice that you'd like to share with the sober nation, whether it's to, someone new in recovery or someone that's having a tough time, or if there's anything that maybe you could share.
Well, I mean, I think what I like to say and what I really think is the most important piece, it's like, let's say you're in the beginning of your recovery and you're having a tough time. Like, there's nothing I can say to prevent you from going out and using and doing what you want. But what I think is, give it 6 months and follow the suggestions, and do everything they tell you to do, and tell me your life doesn't get better. You know what I mean? It's like, it's very simple. I see it as like, I never got time. You know what I mean? I never got any time, and I never got any recovery. And then my convergence happened, but my convergence happened because of fear of losing touch with my kid, of not being able to see my kid, and realizing that my life was meaningless without that. Like, what kind of life would I have if I couldn't see her? So I imagined my recovery as kind of me sitting next to the ocean with a bucket, like a bucket, like a kid fills up with sand. But I have this empty bucket, right? And I have the ocean, and I have an eyedropper, and I'm filling up that bucket with an eyedropper. So that's going to take forever. And what I want to do is make sure that bucket doesn't spill, because I need to fill it up. And if it spills, then I'm gonna have to do it again, and it's gonna take forever. So I always imagined it like that. And if I protect it, and I protect my bucket, and I keep doing it, it's gonna fill up, and it's not gonna spill, and it's gonna be safe because I protected it. And I think if you don't protect it, it spills, and if you're lucky, you get to start filling it up again. And if you're not, you fucking rattle off into the ocean, or you don't get to do anything. It's like, life is full of such amazing possibilities, and they're very hard to come close to when you're using. I guess that's my advice.
Yeah, no, that's awesome advice. And before we got started, you had mentioned the word vigilance, that people in recovery need to remain vigilant. I think that's so perfectly put. We've got to stay on top of this thing, and remain vigilant, and stick with it. But I'm with you, man. Give it a little time.
Yeah, give it some time, and the biggest piece of advice is have fun. Have fun. Do things you like to do. If you like to eat ice cream, eat ice cream. If you like to watch TV, watch TV. If it's 9 o'clock and you want to use, watch a TV show until you can go to bed, and then go to bed. You know what I mean? Like, distract yourself. Just constantly run things in your head to get away from that thing. I mean, if you can get spiritual right away, good for you. It took me years to adopt prayer and meditation to a point where it actually works. And for me, like The Sopranos and The Wire and Mad Men and Haagen-Dazs and fucking Tate's Cookies and Entenmann's Cakes, like, were my higher power. And like, I have a pint of Ben and Jerry's chocolate therapy waiting for me right now, and I'm super psyched to eat it. Like, just have fun, do your best to have fun. I mean, it's like, because there's like, I love that we are not a glum lot, right? There is no point of doing this to be miserable. That's not the point.
It's not. Man, that's awesome advice. So you can check out Dave and the Dopey Podcast on Apple Music and Spotify, or by visiting dopeypodcast.com. Thanks again for coming on the show, Dave.
That's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Be sure to check out the show notes for all the info from today's episode. Sober Nation FM is brought to you by Sobriety Engine. Sobriety Engine is a free online community of men and women supporting each other in their recovery. Visit sobrietyengine.com to join today. This show is also brought to you by Recover Health. If you're ready to get fit and start living a healthier lifestyle while supporting your sobriety, you can learn more about having me as your own personal fitness and nutrition coach at rcvrhealth.com. And again, whether you're listening to the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or watching on YouTube, please share this with your friends, follow, subscribe, and leave us a review. Nation, thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.